Have you ever wondered what to do if your property doesn't meet regulatory requirements anymore for a specific population that you serve? It could possibly keep you up at night if that happens. So, welcome to Live for Free, where we transform lives through real estate. And in today's episode, we are going to talk specifically about the steps that you need to do in order to keep your properties compliant, and then what you would do when compliance issues arise. Now, let me tell you, this conversation here, I've got experience in. Only because it's happened to me a few times, and as a result of those times, I have learned. So I'm hoping that you will learn from some of my experience. So hopefully stay on till the end. If you are thinking that this is something that you want to prepare for, I'll give you some strategies specifically that you can focus on to make sure those things don't happen to you. So as we look into this space, you need to understand why it's so important to make sure that your property stays compliant, especially when you're working with a vulnerable population that has specific requirements in order for them to stay there. And the reason why it's so important is because of that very reason. You're impacting people, and what you don't want to do is not be prepared for this, especially if you're serving a population such as individuals who have to register as sex offenders. That's a very vulnerable population when it comes to housing. So you want to make sure that you've done your due diligence just to make sure that you are prepared for what is to come. Now, also another reason why it's important is because the more information that you know, the more you have to be able to layer your property with things that it needs. For instance, you heard me earlier talking about zoning or having an understanding of what's coming down the pike. If you need to know, you need to be in the know of what's going on in a particular area so that as it's coming down, you will not be caught off guard. So being aware of the importance of knowing what compliance you have to comply with, that's going to help you along the way. As well as, even if you can think about being compliant outside of your municipality, what about your neighborhood? You got neighborhood meetings that happen on a regular basis that you want to be in the know. So it's important for you to be aware of this type of information because it's impacting people at the end of the day. You're impacting the people that you serve, especially if you serve a niche, and you want to make sure that no matter an outcome, no matter what happens in a property, you have ways in which you can still move that property along. You're not just sitting on a property you can't do nothing with. That's why I tell people all the time, location is everything. Being able to select the right property and at the right time, because you don't want to pay more than you have to, but making sure you're picking the right property for the type of population that you're serving, so that you're making sure that, yep, you've thought through everything you need to, as well as the things that you need to do in order to keep your property compliant, because those are the things that will get you in trouble. And you do not want to be in a position where you are putting people at risk who are staying into your housing to being unhoused, because that's why we're here in the first place, right? We want to make sure that we're providing housing for individuals who need housing. We do not want to add to our current unhoused population by having to eject people from your property because you didn't do what you needed to do to stay compliant. And those are the type of things that you need to be aware of. So as you're thinking about the importance of being compliant, it's important also, I'll say too, even after you have done your due diligence and you've now purchased the property and you now have residents in there, you still have to constantly check that property. You have to constantly check it for compliance, making sure you stay compliant. One of the things I hear all the time are people who purchase properties, right? And they get everything passed and inspected on a property. And next thing you know, because they didn't do their research, when they like changed the utilities, it triggered another inspection, which now they had to come in and do an inspection, and oops, something didn't work right, or all of a sudden now the property is no longer livable in their mind, so now they're going to kick everybody out. Being aware of what things would even trigger you to be not compliant. Those are the type of things that you need to be looking for and be aware of as you're doing it. And we've been doing this, as I say all the time, over 15 years, doing this type of work to where we're so knowledgeable about the things that you need to look for. We're constantly aware of it. So if you want to know more information on how you can exercise some of these things, put some things in the comments. I'd love to hear from you so we can be able to help you move into this same space of managing properties such as this. So having those constant checks on a regular basis is important for you to understand how to move this forward so that it benefits the people that you're serving. So now that we have sort of covered some of the importance of why you need to do it, I want to go through a couple of scenarios that are definitely non-compliant scenarios. I mentioned one of them already when you talk about an individual who has a property that triggered an inspection. So now that the property is triggered for an inspection because they didn't do the work necessary to get the work compliant and where it's truly fully livable, triggered the property where they couldn't live there anymore. That is devastating to an individual, to be able, or a group of people who now no longer might have a place to live. So doing the things necessary to make sure that your property passes inspections, doing your inspections before you move into properties. I know people who don't even do inspections beforehand. Like, I can't imagine that. But making sure you've done your inspections beforehand, as well as for all the things that they're going to be looking for. You want to make sure that that property is compliant and that you're meeting all the guidelines. Or even understanding, you really are running a boarding house. You're not running a transitional housing facility. You've not done the proper steps necessary to even be compliant to run that. Those are things that can hit you as a scenario that will make your property non-compliant for what you're having it for. So making sure that you've done the necessary steps to make sure that that property stays compliant is critical to you moving forward. Another scenario that definitely hits home is related to zoning. I could talk about this one specifically because we had purchased a property. It was a 50-unit building, and it was amazing, an amazing property. And hindsight 2020, thinking about it now, I'm like, man, woulda, shoulda, coulda. Purchased the property, amazing 50-unit. We were going to be able to help so many people in this area. But I was in an area that was a municipality that does not allow, let's just say, people who look like me to come in and be able to create, and it required us to go to zoning. So long story short, and it was a battle of maybe 5 months that we battled with this property to get it zoned properly for what we wanted to do. But because of NIMBYism, because they didn't want it in their backyard, not in my backyard, NIMBYism, they shot it down. And it was close. We had almost half of the board on board, but it was that one person that said no on that council. And unfortunately, we could not do what we wanted to do in the property. So we had to be able to quickly maneuver and get out of that situation. Now, hindsight 2020, looking at that, because I think about the steps that we took going into, we took a lot of great steps, from talking to meeting first of all with the commissioner, the planning commissioner of that municipality. Went to make sure we understood what they were looking for. We went into it making sure that we understood that even though the property was grandfathered, it was no longer grandfathered in, which that would have been the thing you want to make sure of, is if you get a property, make sure it's grandfathered in with what it used to do, because this property used to do what I was doing. It was just out of that out of that time frame for like 2 or 3 months. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm 2 or 3 months outside. And then also, when I went into it, um, I did not have as much support of the neighbors. So hindsight 2020, when I can think of the things that worked well but that didn't work well because I did not get a full support of the neighborhood of wanting something like that that could impact tremendously in the area. And I also threw a, and I messed up. I'll tell you first. Was the first one to say I messed up, but I said something that someone was supporting me. They didn't want me to publicly say that they were supporting me, and I did. So those type of things can shoot you in the foot. Hindsight 2020, when you're dealing with a property that's dealing with zoning, you want to make sure you have full support of people in support of what you're wanting to do. So once again, you want to go into these scenarios knowing what you can know so you can be ahead of it before it is no longer something that you are able to do. The last example I'll give, and then we'll talk about some best practices and things that you can do. This here actually just happened in one of our properties, and not just one, it impacted 5 of our properties. Because as I mentioned, we work with individuals who have to register. And because it's so hard to find housing that meets that specific criteria, we always bought properties just in a little pocket, because that would then allow us to be able to impact as many people as we can and provide housing. So lo and behold, in a property that was compliant, a daycare moved in on the same street. It was even worse. It was a home daycare that moved in on the street, that not just impacted one property, it impacted 4 properties all at once, because we bought in that little nutshell. So I will say this, because when that happened, the great thing that we have at least is the guys that we were housing, they were grandfathered in. The downside is nobody else can move into that property that has to register until that daycare closes. Now, how many of y'all know that you even have a home daycare on your street unless you went to the registry site and saw that? Nobody would have known. You don't have any indicators, no big sign outside saying we're open for business. It's a home daycare. So hindsight 2020, when you think about that particular situation, there's not so many things you can do in those situations to prevent those things from happening, other than making sure that we're probably a part of a neighborhood meeting that they have regularly. Because through a neighborhood meeting, wind would have gotten that they most likely wanted to open a business there in one of the homes, and then that could have at least made us aware ahead of time, or we would have had an opportunity to just see what could be done. But at the end of the day, there are no laws out here preventing a daycare from moving in next to where a sex offender lives. They only have laws that prevent sex offenders from moving near a daycare or a park. And I know many people who are probably listening to my voice right now are saying, we don't care about sex offenders either. Well, you're entitled to that opinion. I'm under a different opinion. I'm under the opinion that people who live their lives, we all do terrible things. All of us. Some extreme, some not extreme. Some while under the influence, some not under the influence. Hurt people. But after people have served their time and they have done what they needed to do as their obligation per that crime, they're entitled to live a life. And I hate the way that they treat individuals like that. But a lot of it is due to lack of knowledge. A lot of it is when you don't know anyone. But when you know someone who has something like that happen to them, and you get to know them as a person, not as an offender, that's when your heart will change. Especially if you have the heart of God in you, then you can have compassion for someone else, because He forgives us every day for our sins. Who are we to hold that against others? So don't get me on that soapbox, because I'll stay on it for a while. But my point being, individuals who are impacted through non-compliance, we have to, as people who provide that type of housing, think of ways that we can be proactive to be able to protect that housing, regardless of who we serve. So, as you think about opportunities to be better in that space, because you definitely need to be a part of. But before I tell you what you need to be a part of, please make sure you subscribe. Subscribe to my channel and be able to click the notifications, because I'm going to start giving you guys some nuggets over the next few weeks. Every week I want to give you out something new that helps you be better in this space, because my goal is to find other compassionate investors like myself who want to be a part of helping other people. So be sure to subscribe and be sure to join my school community. So as I think about the things that you can specifically do to be able to help you be not non-compliant, is you need to, number one, be connected. Wherever the house is at, make sure you know that neighborhood. Know the type of things that are around it. Know who the players are, especially if you're dealing with a very vulnerable population or one that's not accepted. You want to make sure you know who you're dealing with, especially when we're talking about NIMBYism. Most people don't want that in their backyard. If you're working with people who are unhoused, or working with people dealing with mental illness, or working with people who want to stay sober and have sober living housing, you need to know your neighborhood. As you know your neighborhood, making sure you're connected then to the aldermen or the individuals who are in authority there, so that they're aware of the help you want to bring, because you need people who are going to keep you aware of what's going on in a particular neighborhood, and knowing, what type of things, like, if is the property zoned properly for what you're looking to do, know what requirements are required of you to be able to be compliant. Those are the type of things you should be looking at to make sure that you can make sure that your property can continue to move forward. But the most important thing that I think you can do is, at the end of the day, make sure you have a property that is layered with multiple things that you offer it. That way, you're not locked into one specific niche. You can do something different if this one doesn't serve you anymore. My perfect example, the one where we just had 5 properties impacted, what we did in that situation, because those properties still, because I got a sweet spot property, so I can house anyone, but I cater to those who have to register. I just cannot bring those individuals back there to that housing. But we can still cater to others. We're still providing housing. We also layered it with other services that we do that brings in more. So we don't lose the revenue that the property has coming in, or the ability for the property to stay full, because we're catered to multiple different populations that we serve. And we have different funding sources. So when you have multiple funding sources, then you can do multiple things in that property that help serve in the whole. So as you think about a property that is no longer compliant and what to do, I'm hoping that these tips that I gave you help you think differently about the property that you're wanting to purchase for transitional housing. And if you like this particular episode, you're going to love the next one, because we're going to really talk more into how you can explore opportunities and different niches of populations that you can serve in transitional housing. So I look forward to seeing you in the next episode, and get out there and transform lives, because transformed lives transform the world.